Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, September 19, 2023. The U.S. House delays a procedural vote to bring up a temporary federal government funding bill that, if it's passed and signed into law, would avert a government shutdown in 12 days. As there are signs that the latest version of the bill could not get enough House Republican votes to pass, assuming no House Democrat plan to support it. Coming up, we'll hear from the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, plus a Republican for and against this latest funding bill. President Joe Biden tells the United Nations General Assembly in New York City, Russia believes that the world will grow weary and allow it to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. If we allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also speaks to the UN, warning against any peace plan with Russia that would be less than a military victory for Ukraine, saying there's a chance to end the aggression on the terms of the state that was attacked. Also today, the 5 Americans released in a prisoner swap with Iran are back on U.S. soil. The U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo testifies before a House committee on efforts to increase U.S. microchip production and also competition with China. She's just back from a trip to that country. And the FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell is before a House Transportation Subcommittee, question about the Maui wildfires and whether Biden administration climate priorities diverted funds from wildfire prevention. This story from thehill.com, House GOP leadership pulled a procedural vote on a proposed short-term funding stopgap that has bitterly divided the Republican conference and elicited opposition from hardline conservatives. The House was scheduled to vote at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Tuesday on the rule to allow the GOP continuing resolution, or CR, proposal to move forward. But an update sent out shortly before noon did not list the procedural vote. The turmoil around the partisan CR proposal is leaving House Republicans in a sticky situation that members widely agree has no clear way forward without further inflaming Republican tensions and potentially threatening Speaker McCarthy's leadership. The legislation crafted by leaders of the Main Street Caucus and the House Freedom Caucus would avert a government shutdown by extending government funding until October 31st, along with an 8% cut to all discretionary spending outside defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs, plus the bulk of the House Republicans' H.R. 2 border crackdown bill that they passed earlier this year. But upwards of a dozen Republican members, more than enough to sink the plan, and the slim GOP majority swiftly said they would oppose the legislation. That was all the reporting from The Hill. About 10 a.m. Eastern, after the House Republicans met privately, Speaker McCarthy spoke to reporters.
Inside our conference today, we want to make sure that we can curve this runaway spending that the Democrats, when they were in the majority, proposed. We were able to cut quite a bit of that in the debt ceiling. We want to look at other ways that we can eliminate the waste, secure our borders to make it safer, and really stop the fentanyl that we watch day in and day out killing Americans. Almost 300 Americans will be poisoned and die today from fentanyl. It's the equivalent of an airliner crashing every single day in this nation, and this administration does nothing. They got a strike going on into our auto plants, to a president who calls himself the biggest union leader without even being able to solve that problem. We've had 5 embassies that they had to evacuate. We got an administration that just gave $6 billion to Iran, who sits there and helps Russia kill innocent people in Ukraine. We watched this administration fail time and again, and here we are on the cusp of government funding, and he can't even talk to the mayor of New York. We will not stand for that. We're going to pass legislation that curves our spending, secures our border, and puts America in a stronger position for the future.
Mr. Speaker, how? Because it seems like there's not consensus to that based on the conversation that you guys just had in your meeting.
No, I felt the conversation was really good. Were you in the meeting?
No, but just
Then
based on what we've heard.
Then how did you hear if you weren't in the meeting?
I think you know people talk.
Oh, you're listening to the meeting?
No.
But I was in the meeting, so I mean, I thought it was.
The meeting went and what the plan looks like going forward this week.
Okay, so that'd be different than your question because you predisposed what happened in a meeting you weren't in. So what I saw within this meeting was a number of all the members. How do we find to be able to get to a place at 218. You watched us do it time and again. You watched it when you said, why do we stand up to D.C. when the Democrats want to decriminalize all the crimes? Well, you know what? We passed that. We actually made it law when you thought it wouldn't even pass the Senate. You thought we couldn't get to 218 when we said we wanted to make a parent's Bill of Rights so they had a say in their kids' education. We were able to do that. To the debt ceiling. To H.R. 2 to be able to secure our border. To H.R. 1, energy independence. Every time we found a way, and you know what? Getting there is never easy, but we're willing to listen to all voices, something much different. We're willing to build up from the bottom up. And the one thing that we found is members got together over the weekend. It came up with solutions. We aired the solutions right here. I thought we had a very good discussion, and we'll continue that discussion today with those that have some more questions. Maybe there's a place that we improve it as well, and that's what I believe. In constant improvement. We will never give up for the American people, and we will continue to work for it. And if, you know what? America's too great to give up just because you have a tough discussion.
So,
but even if you get to 218, though, is it worth all the hand-wringing? Because Leader Schumer has said this is not a serious proposal in terms of the CR.
Well, I haven't seen the Senate do anything yet, which is interesting. The only thing we've been able to approve on the Senate is because in our debt ceiling we put the 1% cut across the board, so they passed something out of committee. And I would like to see same thing that we watched during the debt ceiling. Schumer didn't want to do anything there either. They just said back. I don't think that's the way you govern. Put your ideas up. We are one body. The Senate is another body. If they have a different idea, put their idea up, and then let's go to conference and figure out the differences. That's the way government was designed in America. But if the whole idea is that the House has to agree to whatever Schumer wants, that doesn't work. It didn't work during the debt ceiling. He wanted to let the debt ceiling go off the cliff. I don't think that was right. I don't think it's right that government shuts down, and that's why I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that doesn't happen. But if Schumer on the other end is doing nothing, he must want to shut down. I don't think that's right. I don't think Americans should hurt. I think we should do our job.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, speaking to reporters this morning. One of the House Republicans opposed to the proposed temporary government funding measure known as a continuing resolution, or CR, is Matt Gaetz of Florida. He also spoke to reporters outside the closed House Republican conference meeting at a different time and a different place than Speaker McCarthy.
So can you give us your latest thoughts on the CR and what your plan is?
I'm doing everything I can to assemble a coalition to defeat the Donald CR. I believe that it is really kind of frivolous in the cuts because they only occur for 30 days. I don't think it would lead to any programmatic reform. And I'm over the CR era of the House of Representatives. The deal we made in January compels single subject spending bills where each agency comes forward and defends their budget. And those would be bills that would be open to amendment. That's what the American people want to see. And that's the only way we're actually going to get to the type of substantive review that yields actual results. 8% cut, 1% cut, 2% cut. This is not the work of a serious legislative body.
And you're comfortable with the government shutdown at the end?
Well, I'm not comfortable with it, frankly. We should have had our spending bills moving. You know, when we passed H.R. 2, we should have passed our Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill. When we moved the NDAA, we should have moved the defense appropriations bill. But we're behind, and someone has to be held accountable for the fact that we've been off schedule. We can't blame Joe Biden and the Democrats for why the Republican-controlled House of Representatives hasn't passed single-subject spending bills. That's our fault. So we have to deal with that. We will likely have to endure some degree of a shutdown, but that's why right now, rather than dithering around with the Donald CR that doesn't have the votes, we should be moving single-subject spending bills.
Your point about the DOD bill not moving sooner, it's our understanding that that bill did not go to the floor last week because conservatives were threatening to tank the rule because they wanted a broader deal on spending.
I was for the rule and for the bill, so you have to take that up with other people. I believe we should move single-subject spending bills for all of these agencies, and I've yet to hear a good reason for why we haven't yet.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, Republican from Florida, with reporters at the informal stakeout position outside the room where House Republicans met this morning. They met without reporters present. That last question about last week, there was going to be the defense spending bill for fiscal year 2024 coming to the floor, but it never did. And perhaps that was because there wouldn't be the votes. Well, today, a procedural motion to bring up that defense spending bill did come to the floor. And it failed, 212 to 214, with 5 Republicans voting no. After the Republican meeting this morning at the regular House Republican Leadership News Conference, Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, a member of the Freedom Caucus, which negotiated the CR, the month-long temporary government funding measure, with the Main Street Caucus, endorsed the plan.
There's a debate going on within the Republican conference and among Republicans in Washington that is the actual debate the American people want us to have to try to reach consensus for solutions that will actually address the problems that are affecting their lives. Our Democrat colleagues refuse to do that. They're not actually serious about addressing the concerns the American people have every day. So sure, we have some robust debates within our conference. They're the debates we should be having across this town that our Democrat colleagues refuse to engage in. So what we have before us right now is legislation that will cut spending to non-defense, non-veteran discretionary spending. In simple speak, the federal bureaucracy that is neither defense nor veterans, by 8%. If my conservative colleagues want to vote against that, go explain that. Go explain that you're voting against a 30-day 8% cut to the federal bureaucracy while having a piece of legislation attached to it that is the strongest border legislation ever passed, and it was passed out of this House Republican Conference. Again, to my so-called conservative colleagues, go explain that.
Congressman Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, at a news conference after the closed meeting of House Republicans and shortly before the scheduled procedural vote on that government funding measure. The CR was postponed, presumably because the whip count showed it would not pass. Fox News reports that Congressman Nick LaLota, Republican from New York, a member of the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, told Fox News Digital that the group was working on its own spending plan and that he would work with Democrats if needed. He's quoted as saying, "I'm on the Problem Solvers Caucus, and there is a deal problem solvers are cooking up. If Republicans can't do it, yes, I would join a deal with Democrats to keep the government funded and to also address the border." And Congressman Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, said Tuesday morning, "I won't be party to a shutdown." Asked if he would work with Democrats on the deal, he told Fox News Digital, "We have a divided government, so there's always going to be a need to be a compromise between Republicans and Democrats on anything. I've never had a problem working with anybody." House Democrats held their own closed meeting this morning, and the House Democratic Caucus Chair, Pete Aguilar of California, at a news conference was asked how the Democrats see this situation.
I understand that you are blaming the Republicans for the situation we find ourselves in a little more than 10 days away from a shutdown. Are there any kind of break glass in case of emergency plans in the Democratic caucus to try and find a way through at least a continuing resolution? Are there discussions happening amongst your conference with that? Are you talking, I know you say there are no moderate Republicans, but Republicans that may be inclined to have those conversations? Is anything like that happening right now?
We want to govern. I mean, and if you hear, frustration from House Democrats, it's because this was completely avoidable. We had a deal. The president negotiated a deal with the speaker. It wasn't a perfect deal. Not every member of our caucus endorsed it because it contained cuts that we felt would hurt the American people, but it was a deal, and it got us out of a very tough position. And so we wanted to honor that deal. It took Speaker McCarthy 10 days to back away from a deal that he negotiated, to give appropriators a new top-line number that put dramatic cuts, that added ideological writers, eroding women's reproductive freedom, cutting education, cuts that were not part of those discussions. As the vice chair said, the Republicans have backed away from this deal. So, it was completely avoidable. We hold out hope that there are folks on the other side of the aisle who want to govern. We see that that can be done, but we have done that before. But right now, it can't be done if Republicans are focused on finding 218 votes within their own extreme caucus for a patch of whatever days they are trying to solve. This avoids the fact that we still have budget work to do. We have bills to pass, and Republicans still have not passed any bipartisan bills. In fact, they've only passed one off of the House floor, arguably the easiest bill. As an appropriator, I feel comfortable saying that. So this is a problem of their own choosing, and so but we do hold out hope, and we will work with them where we can. But they have given in to the extremists here, and as long as that continues, this is where we're at. And so 7 legislative days away, that's where we are.
House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar meeting with reporters. From roll call, House Republicans released a long-delayed budget blueprint Tuesday that promises to bring the federal budget into balance over a decade through steep cuts to discretionary spending, new restrictions on the social safety net, and relatively rosy assumptions of consistently strong economic growth. The Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said again today that the House Republican bill to temporarily fund the government beyond September 30th is a non-starter in the Senate, and he called the proposed spending cuts reckless and cruel. And the White House put out a statement with less than 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year. Extreme House Republicans are playing partisan games with people's lives and marching our country toward a government shutdown instead of working in a bipartisan manner to keep the government open and address emergency needs for the American people. The White House also giving specifics about what an 8% proposed spending cut in the Republican bill for everything except veterans programs and defense spending would mean. Some of the examples, according to the White House: 800 fewer Customs and Border Protection agents and officers, 110,000 children would lose access to Head Start slots, and a roughly $500 reduction to the maximum Pell Grant for 6.6 million students. Also not included in the House Republican short-term government funding plan, the one presented so far, $4 billion in emergency money to replenish the FEMA Natural Disaster Aid Fund as requested by President Biden, and requested by President Biden $24 billion in aid for Ukraine, for that country to continue fighting Russian forces still occupying a large part of eastern and southern Ukraine. Speaker McCarthy says that he wants that aid debated separately from other government funding. Senate Democratic leaders in the White House would rather it all be packaged together. From CNN at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City today, President Joe Biden on Tuesday made a forceful call for the world to stand up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, calling for leaders to stand firm in their support of President Volodymyr Zelensky and his nation as the war heads towards its second autumn. President Biden said Russian President Vladimir Putin and his armed forces are betting the world will grow weary of supporting Ukraine, and it is incumbent upon the countries in the United Nations to stand firm against President Putin's aggression. That from CNN. Here's part of President Biden's speech.
Like every nation in the world, the United States wants this war to end. No nation wants this war to end more than Ukraine. And we strongly support Ukraine in its efforts to bring about a diplomatic resolution that delivers just and lasting peace. But Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately. And it's Russia alone that stands in the way of peace, because Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation, Ukraine's territory, and Ukraine's children. Russia believes that the world will grow weary and allow it to brutalize Ukraine without consequence. But I ask you this: if we abandon the core principles of the United States to appease an aggressor, can any member state in this body feel confident that they are protected? If you allow Ukraine to be carved up, is the independence of any nation secure? I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today and deter other would-be aggressors tomorrow. That's why the United States, together with our allies and partners around the world, will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and their freedom. It's not only an investment in Ukraine's future, but in the future of every country that seeks a world governed by basic rules that apply equally to all nations and uphold the rights of every nation, no matter how big or small. Sovereignty, territorial integrity, they are the fixed foundations of this noble body.
President Biden speaking to the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. He plans to meet with Brazil's President Lula da Silva to discuss labor issues and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. But again, this is from the CNN article. With high-level absences from Russia, China, France, and the United Kingdom, all permanent members of the UN Security Council, the Biden administration will be relegated to lower-level engagements with key allies and adversaries, all while hoping to elevate the United States' views of global infrastructure, food security, democratic values, and territorial sovereignty. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky listened to President Biden from the audience and later in the morning addressed the UN himself, saying he'll present the Ukrainian peace plan to the UN Security Council tomorrow.
And tomorrow I will present the details at a special meeting of the UN Security Council. The main thing is that it is not only about Ukraine. More than 140 states and international organizations have supported the Ukrainian peace formula fully or in part. The Ukrainian peace formula is becoming global. Its points offer solutions and steps that will stop all forms of weaponization that Russia used against Ukraine and other countries and may be used by other aggressors. Look, for the first time in modern history, we have a real chance to end the aggression on the terms of the nation which was attacked. And this is a real chance for every nation to ensure that aggression against your state, if it happens, God forbid, will end, not because your land will be divided and you will be forced to submit to military or political pressure, but because your territory and sovereignty will be fully restored. We launched the format of meetings between national security advisors and diplomatic representatives. Important talks and consultations were held in Hiroshima, in Copenhagen, and in Jeddah on the implementation of the peace formula. And we are preparing a global peace summit. And please, I invite all of you who do not tolerate any aggression to jointly prepare the summit. And I am aware of the attempts to make some shady dealings behind the scenes. Evil cannot be trusted. Ask Prigozhin if one bets on Putin's promises.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the UN General Assembly in New York. He'll be coming to Washington, D.C. later this week to meet with President Biden at the White House and also with members of Congress considering President Biden's request for more aid to Ukraine. And CBC in Canada reports its sources say the President Zelensky will also then make a trip to Canada with stops in Ottawa and Toronto. Associated Press, Dateline Ramstein Air Base in Germany, reports that U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin urged allies Tuesday to dig deep and provide more air defense systems for Ukraine to help it block increasing barrages of Russian missiles, even as debate grows in Congress over aid to Kyiv. But while the allies said they will discuss how they can best help Ukraine's counteroffensive in the coming winter months, they appeared no closer to commitments on the longer-range missiles that Kyiv's leaders insist they need as they struggle to retake land gained by Russia earlier in the conflict. At a post-meeting news conference, Secretary Austin made specific mention of the value of air defense systems.
So far, the United States and Ukraine's global partners have provided more than $76 billion in direct security assistance. And we're ensuring accountability of U.S. contributions through robust in-use monitoring. And we'll continue to work closely with our Ukrainian partners to ensure that all assistance is used effectively and safeguarded. Our assistance has included artillery, armor, air defense, ammunition, and other key pieces of military equipment to help Ukraine mount its counteroffensive to push back dug-in Russian invaders. And I want to underscore the importance of the life-saving air defense systems that we have provided together, systems such as the Patriot and Hawk and Iris-T and NASAMS and GOP. These air defense capabilities are protecting Ukraine's forces, its civilians, and its critical infrastructure. Over the past year, the whole world has seen Russia's vicious attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The Kremlin has tried in vain to use cold and darkness to break the will of the Ukrainian people.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin in Germany after a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, the more than 50 nations who are providing aid and weapons to Ukraine. Also standing by his side, General Mark Milley, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And from an Associated Press article about Ukraine's counteroffensive, General Milley pushed back against suggestions that progress is too slow, saying the Ukrainians have made it clear that they intend to fight through the winter when the muddy fall ground freezes. Russia was able to greatly shore up its defenses last winter as fighting slowed. You're listening to Washington Today. The 5 Americans released from detention in Iran after being charged with espionage and designated wrongfully detained by the U.S. arrived back on U.S. soil early this morning. They were released as part of a prisoner swap for 5 Iranian nationals in U.S. custody, and also the unfreezing of $6 billion in Iranian oil revenues in South Korea that had been frozen due to U.S. sanctions. The prisoners coming back from Iran flew from Qatar to Fort Belvoir military airfield right near Washington, D.C. There were emotional reunions on the tarmac, and then they were greeted by Roger Carstens, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs.
Grateful to have all you here. On behalf of the President of the United States and the Secretary of State, it's an honor to be the first to welcome you back to the United States of America and to freedom. It's good to see so many faces. I've known most of you for many years now as we've fought this fight together, and we've all looked forward to this day, but we all knew that this day was eventually going to come. Surrounding you, we have a lot of people that represent the hundreds, if not thousands of people that have worked tirelessly to bring you all home over the last few years. One of them is the Special Envoy for Iran, you know him, Abram Paley.
Just incredibly happy to have worked with all of you for this day. We all knew it would come on behalf of many, many hundreds and thousands of people in the government, some around here that have worked with you for this day to occur. So happy to be here. Congratulations.
So, enjoy your reunion. Go through the Army's program on post-isolation support. Maintain that connectivity. Let's stay in touch. This is not goodbye. And I know a lot of you are going to maintain the fight to try to bring more Americans home. So God bless, and God bless America. Short and sweet.
This is what it's all about, right?
It is.
Yeah, well done.
Day 2 of my job, this guy right here.
I was like,
yeah, he was on me like a... You guys followed.
We were the nice ones.
At Fort Belvoir in Virginia, Roger Carstens, U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and Abram Paley, Deputy Special Envoy for Iran, as the 5 Americans in that prisoner exchange and the $6 billion money release occurred and the Americans came home. From Al Jazeera, the deal has already opened U.S. President Joe Biden to new criticism from Republicans and others who say the administration was being held ransom and help boost the sanctions-hit Iranian economy. But President Biden, who thanked in a statement the leaders of Qatar and Oman for facilitating the agreement, insisted that reuniting wrongfully detained Americans with their loved ones has been a priority for his administration. U.S. officials also insisted the money will be used only for humanitarian purposes, with a threat to refreeze the funds if not. Iran, however, has insisted it has full access. That from Al Jazeera. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Attorney General Merrick Garland testifies Wednesday on oversight of the Justice Department. He's expected to be asked about the indictments against former President Trump and President Biden's son, Hunter, as well as New Mexico's gun ban. Watch live before the House Judiciary Committee at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. C-SPAN Now, our free mobile video app, or online at cspan.org.
And also live here on C-SPAN Radio. Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. A few more headlines. The U.S. House Oversight Committee will be holding its first hearing on the impeachment inquiry of President Joe Biden on September 28th. A committee spokesperson saying the hearing will focus on constitutional and legal questions surrounding the president's involvement in corruption and abuse of public office. A spokesperson adding the committee intends to subpoena the president's son, Hunter Biden, and the president's brother, James Biden, for their personal and business bank records as early as this week. And from CNN, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro announced Tuesday the state will now automatically register eligible Pennsylvanians to vote when they obtain or renew identification cards and driver's licenses. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, back from recent trade trip to China, testified today before the U.S. House Science, Space, and Technology Committee on the anniversary of the CHIPS and Science Act, that's a $280 billion bill that provides $50 billion to the Commerce Department to boost U.S. semiconductor manufacturing and research. From the Washington Examiner, Commerce Secretary Raimondo said she was surprised by the release of a Chinese-built mobile phone with advanced chips, but did not believe it was proof that China could produce similar chips at a scale that would allow the country to keep up with the United States. She was questioned by Congressman Darrell Issa, a Republican from California.
When you were in China just days ago,
a couple weeks ago,
you were bushwhacked, to say the least, by the launch of a 5G phone and the proof that China has achieved 7 nanometer capability. That wasn't an accident. They chose you as an important symbol of their accomplishment. The tools that are at your disposal, one of them clearly to stop the export of technology that allows exactly what has just occurred to occur. The other one, though, is the one I want to focus on for a moment. Even though the Undersecretary for Intellectual Property, the PTO director, is somewhat independent, still falls under yours, and the coordination is uniquely yours as the Secretary. My question to you is, 3 of the top 10 patent recipients last year were Chinese. Only 1 was American. The reality is that Huawei, a company not able to do business in the United States, continues to receive, and often clandestinely through proxies, they continue to receive royalties because they are in fact patenting the technology. And there were a couple people that talked about trees and valleys. I'm from Telecom Gulch, San Diego. We are extremely concerned that your administration has to find a way to block in a different way. It's not just about a particular device going to China from Lam or some other entity. The reality is that if China is allowed to create blocking and revenue technology in 5G, in telecommunication, in a host of areas as they are, the patent system, both directly through real innovation and through what I would call AI blocking, in other words, coming up with patents that envision things that they haven't really reduced to practice, will be used against us to thwart us. What can you do with the combination of those and other tools?
Yeah. So let me say this. I would welcome to come sit with you if you have ideas for our consideration. We're trying to use every single tool at our disposal, BIS, enforcement, patents, to deny the Chinese an ability to, get intellectual property, to advance their technology in ways that can hurt us. I was obviously, I don't know what the right word, upset, when I saw the Huawei announcement. The only good news, if there is any, is we don't have any evidence that they can manufacture 7 nanometer at scale. And although I can't talk about any investigations specifically, I promise you this. Every time we find credible evidence that any company has gone around our export controls, we do investigate. But as it relates to IP, I'll come sit with you or have Kathy Vidal come sit with you. If you have ideas for how we can tighten it up, I want to hear them.
Well, I have been able to meet with Kathy. I'd love to meet with you because during the time I left Congress for 2 years, my job was to try to figure out how to compete with Belt and Road. And we don't do it well because we don't coordinate the way China does in competing against us. I would like to see in technology that we do coordinate yours and other parts of the government. So I'll be happy to meet with you at your convenience.
Congressman Darrell Issa, Republican from California, questioning Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo at today's Science, Space, and Technology Committee hearing. It was titled Chips on the Table, a one-year review of the Chips and Science Act. Again, from the Washington Examiner article, a group of 10 prominent Republican U.S. representatives sent a letter to Commerce Undersecretary Alan Estevez to demand answers about whether there were breaches in U.S. export controls at the Bureau of Industry and Security that allowed the phone's manufacturer to make the advanced chips in China. The representative also asked Commerce Department to adopt complete blocking sanctions against Huawei and the chip manufacturer Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation. The administrator of FEMA, Deanne Criswell, testified today before a House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee on Emergency Management about FEMA preparedness and response to disasters. The subcommittee chair, Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, asked her about the wildfires in Hawaii, in Maui. That killed 97 people, left thousands more homeless, destroyed over 2,000 structures, and caused, by some estimates, $4 to $6 billion in damage. Chair Perry said that Hawaii's main electricity producer, Hawaii Electric, did not take steps to prevent wildfires, such as insulating wires and clearing brush, because, he says, it was spending so much money to comply with Hawaii's mandate that all electricity must be produced from renewables by 2045. After that questioning from Congressman Perry, you're going to hear questions from the subcommittee's ranking Democrat, Dina Titus of Nevada.
This has become the policy of not only Hawaii, but many Western states where wildfires are prevalent. Should the American taxpayer, through FEMA, be responsible for paying for recovery efforts if states are diverting money away from mitigation efforts to misguided net zero policies that actively exacerbate fire conditions and endanger the citizens of those states? Should the taxpayer be required to pay for that?
Chairman, we're seeing an increase in the number of wildfires across the U.S. and
I don't know that that's true, but regardless, what I'm talking about is what's causing them. Policies are causing the wildfires. People are losing their lives and their property. Should the rest of America be paying for that when that can all be avoided? That is the question.
FEMA's role should always be to go in and support the response and recovery of communities that are impacted by any type of severe weather event.
Regardless of poor management decisions that are life-threatening.
We also have several programs that help communities invest in mitigation to reduce the impact. That is a focus that we need to continue to work on together.
Are you doing anything to reduce the impact of these net zero policies?
To reduce the impact of severe weather events.
No, net zero policies. That's my question. Are you doing anything to mitigate them so these people's lives and homes can be saved? Are you doing anything in that arena?
Our focus, Chairman, is to work with communities to reduce the impact of whatever the risk is that they're
Okay, so the answer would be no. I thank the gentlelady, and I yield to the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Titus, for questions.
Thank you. I'm still trying to figure out how using renewable energy causes wildfires, but I guess there's an explanation for it. Trees explode. I don't know. Anyway, we know that the balance is down to $2.4 billion in the relief fund. That sounds like a lot, but as we have more disasters, they last longer, they do more damage, they're more expensive. This money is going to be gone very quickly, and I've been very vocal about supporting supplemental funding to the DRF and saying that it should pass the House without any social policy poison pills attached to it. One area that you don't hear as much about, but it certainly is a partner of yours, is the National Weather Service. Now, the National Weather Service, I think, is one of the strongest federal partners we have for emergency managers. We rely on their services daily to predict what's going to happen, forecast, warnings, decision support. Now, the Republicans have proposed slashing the National Weather Service by $200 million this fiscal year. I wonder if you could comment on how that will undermine some of your efforts, or if you think that's a good idea.
Ranking Member Titus, the National Weather Service is such a great partner for us, and all of the sister agencies that go with that, the National Water Center, the National Hurricane Center, all of those components underneath NOAA. They bring us critical data and information as well as modeling to help us anticipate what the threats are going to be to a community so we can put the right measures in place to help protect them, whether that is as we're watching a storm develop and allowing us to pre-position resources into areas so we can perform life-saving actions, to predicting what the future might hold to help better invest our mitigation dollars. Any reduction in the ability for us to get that valued information, data, and modeling would have a significant impact on the safety and security of our communities across the nation.
It would negatively affect your ability to spend the taxpayer dollars in the most efficient way to save property and to, more importantly, save lives. Is that right?
I think it would cause us to have an increase in the amount of money that we're spending on responding and recovering because we won't have the accurate data to better mitigate against the future risks that they're facing.
Thank you.
Congresswoman Dina Titus, Democrat from Nevada, and you also heard from Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania, questioning the witness today, Administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Deanne Criswell, a subcommittee hearing on FEMA preparedness and response to disasters. Environmental Protection Agency has been overseeing the clearing of hazardous materials from the areas in Maui that sustained wildfire damage. Residents are expected to be allowed to start to return within about a week. Wall Street today, the Dow down 106, NASDAQ down 32, S&P down 9. Washington Times previewing another hearing that C-SPAN covered. Former U.S. Capitol Police Chief Stephen A. Sund expected to testify before the House Administration Oversight Subcommittee Tuesday to discuss the security failures that led to the riot at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. Article goes on that House Republican leadership has promised to scrutinize the defunct Democratic-appointed and controlled January 6 Select Committee from the last Congress, which GOP lawmakers say botched a proper after-action report by being too politicized and not focused on how to prevent a future security breach. That was from the Washington Times. Here's part of the opening statement from Stephen Sund.
The January 6 attack at the Capitol was preventable. If the intelligence had been accurately reported and the FBI and DHS had followed their policies and established practices, I wouldn't be sitting here today. There was a failure to connect the dots on 9/11 and again on January 6. I'm concerned if we do not identify and correct these issues, we may fail again in the future. I did everything I could to protect and defend the U.S. Capitol and the members of Congress prior to and on January 3rd. Prior to January 6th and prior to and on January 6th. On January 3rd, I requested the assistance of the National Guard to support my perimeter and was denied by the 2 sergeant-at-arms over the concern for politics and optics. Still concerned for the number of personnel I had on my perimeter, I called the MPD earlier on the morning of January 6th and asked if they could stage additional personnel closer to the Capitol on Constitution Avenue. Less than 2 hours later, we were violently attacked on the west front of the Capitol at 12:53 p.m. I immediately followed up on that morning call and contacted MPD Chief Carroll at 12:55 p.m. and requested those resources. MPD was on the scene within minutes and were assisting my officers in holding the line and delaying the breach of the building. It took 81 agonizing minutes for that mob to fight their way through numerous police lines before they were able to breach the Capitol. The decision to reach out to MPD proved critical in safeguarding the members of Congress. Minutes after the attack began, I made my first call to House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving at 12:58 p.m. to request approval to bring in the National Guard. "Let me run it up the chain, and I will get back to you," was his response. It would be 71 minutes before that approval would finally come. Between 12:58 and when I finally received approval for the National Guard at 2:09 p.m., I made 32 calls to coordinate support from my officers, including at least 11 frustrating calls to the Sergeant-at-Arms regarding my request for the National Guard. My calls to my partner law enforcement agencies resulted in hundreds of police officers from around the National Capital Region and as far away as New Jersey responding to assist. After I received approval to call in the National Guard, I then had to beg the Pentagon officials to send us help. I was repeatedly denied assistance by the Army Lieutenant General Pyatt, citing concerns over optics of the National Guard on Capitol Hill.
Steve Sund was U.S. Capitol Police Chief from 2019 until he resigned on January 16, 2021, after then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for him to step down and blamed him for not securing the Capitol during the attack on January 6th of that year. You can find the full hearing with him before the House Administration Subcommittee at our website, cspan.org. And finally, on Washington Today from CNN, the Prince of Wales revealed the short list of 15 innovators in the running to win one of 5 £1 million, about $1.2 million, grants from his prestigious Eco Prize later this year. Prince William flew to New York on Monday for a 2-day visit during which he attended the second Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit, an event which coincides with both Climate Week, New York City, and the 78th session of the UN General Assembly, where the finalists were unveiled. That from CNN. Today, Prince William, in an interview, revealed that he woke up early this morning to exercise with New Yorkers.
Is it true? Did you go running in Central Park this morning?
I did, Vita, yes. I decided to join the hordes of New Yorkers doing their morning routine as they went around Central Park. But it was wonderful waking up in New York on a sunny morning rather than the rain we had yesterday. And it was beautiful getting some fresh air this morning.
Prince William at the Earthshot Prize Innovation Summit in New York City. His Royal Foundation launched that prize in 2020 with the goal of finding trailblazing climate solutions to repair our planet by 2030. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories being talked about in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy from Washington and across the country. Coming up Wednesday morning, Semaphore political reporter Khadija Goba discusses the latest efforts in Congress to pass government funding bills before the September 30th deadline. Then, Texas Democratic Congressman Henry Cuellar, a member of the Appropriations Committee, talks about the funding deadline, aid to Ukraine, and congressional news of the day. Also, Victor Cha with the Center for Strategic and International Studies on the recent meeting between Russia's Vladimir Putin and North Korea's Kim Jong-un, and what that could mean for Russia's war against Ukraine. And Texas Republican Congressman Pat Fallon discusses the government funding deadline, the Biden impeachment inquiry, aid to Ukraine, and congressional news of the day. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Wednesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.